We all have challenges, and certainly over the last 4 years, 3 years, we have seen a significant amount of change, and we've had to move with it, and we've had to have our organizations follow us. But change happens every single day. And in order for an organization to run well, change and how it is managed is really important. So, my last um, blog that I did, my full blog that I did, I talked about 5 elements that I personally feel are really important when we're thinking about change. This wasn't based on my studies or my reading. This is very much based on my leadership, on my experiences as a leader and with this organization. So, and just as a reminder, this blog is overall called Our Roadmap to Transformative Services. And the reason that we're doing this is because we have seen so much change across our city, across our state, and across our nation, and really across the globe over the last several years. And in the last couple years, what I've seen is that the innovation that we experienced as a group of people during COVID is now moving towards business as usual, and yet the world is no longer business as usual. Our clients have changed significantly. The needs of our education system is totally different. The behavioral health needs of the children and the families we serve is at a completely different place than it was before COVID. And so, what I want to push is that we need to continue to innovate and think differently as we move into the future of services than what we've been doing before COVID even began. Just to give an overview of those 5 elements that I think a leader must think through when they do have to incorporate change within their organizations is relationships and the importance of relationships all across the board, above and below and side by side with colleagues. Trust as another key element that we must have, communication, ownership, and then the one that we're specifically talking about today is the beautiful balance between authority and humility when we're walking our staff and our constituents through change and transformation. So, with that being said, I'm doing a series of interviews with my own staff at all levels of the organization and getting their input on some of these key elements. And for this specific go around, I have introduced Chuck Akaluka, who came to Cora just before COVID happened, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. And has just been a phenomenal leader that has walked through COVID alongside of me, as well as now into kind of the present and the future. I value his personal opinion on this because I know both the idea of having strong authority as well as humility in that role is really important. He is the vice president of our clinical services division. So, with that being said, Chuck, welcome to this topic.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Chuck. Last name is Akaluka. Vice President of Clinical Services. I've been with Cora been with Cora now 3 years. My anniversary was last week.
Mm-hmm.
And
Congratulations, we made
it. Thank you. I remember walking into Cora and was only in 10 days, and we went virtual. And it's been a remarkable experience. It's been wonderful to go into COVID, into that period of COVID, starting new programs, even as we try to figure out how to really navigate the whole operations as we moved on. I oversee the division. Clinical has 5 primary subsystems. There's the assessment services, we have intervention services, we have counseling services, we have drug, alcohol related services, and our biggest program, IBHS. We serve kids within the community, kids and clients within the community. We also have outpatient services that we provide at Cora, but we also go into the community to provide behavioral health services too.
Yeah, that's great. So let's start with the very first question. And it's a 2-part question. So it's, what do you personally need to shift gears when an organization is changing, and what is most essential for you to trust and follow leadership?
So let me respond to that question, but let me take the little question first, and then I'll go to the phone. What do I need? What does an individual need to trust an agency or organization, especially when we try to go through change? There's an analogy that I coined, and I call that a trust reservoir, trust bank. My thinking is that when an individual enters into a contractual relationship with an employer who is really committed to wanting to engage a staff immediately opens up a trust reservoir. I call it a trust bank, whatever that you call it. It will be something to the nature of creating a reservoir of trying to build trust over time. And so the the agency must commit to depositing things into that reservoir. And as the reservoir grows, the ability of the staff to trust the agency grows with it. And so when the need to really have difficult conversation comes up, the hope is that that reservoir is big enough that that individual can take from it and help or work with the agency through that process. And what the agency deposit into the trust reservoir are things in the normal course of operations. It includes wage, a fair wage. It includes um, benefits, PTO. It includes retirement contribution. It includes relationship that an employee directly has with their supervisor. It includes checking in. You know, if somebody is sick, are we able to work with them, not just look at a policy, but also concern about their own wellness and work with them to get back on track. So it's a combination of everything that builds that trust reservoir. And it's so needed because there will be a time when we have difficult conversations. You will need that employee buying into that decision making process. And if you really allowed yourself to accumulate trust over time, that first conversation even becomes easier to do, right? So let's go back to the first question, which is, what do you personally need in order to shift gear? Um, as a staff of an agency, you need your leaders communicating to you effectively. I also call that pitch communication. It's like a marketing pitch where you try to sell something, but you say it over and over and over and give people opportunity to ask you questions, right? Because you need pitch communication as a leader to get that buy-in. And if people also trust that you that is communicating, you also believe in what you're trying to sell them, right? So you must show that leadership. You must show a good understanding and good gravitas of what you're trying to sell, because as you communicate, people are trying to read between the fine lines of your communication, the way you communicate, your attitude, your body language, and they understanding, are they really sure that this is the right course that we're taking? And if they believe you enough, if they have trusted you enough, that communication even becomes a little bit flawless and it's easy to get by. And one other thing I think, which is the most important, is no matter what we're trying to do, we don't oversell, we don't overpromise, right? It is okay not to know everything.
It's interesting that you bring up trust so much in this conversation, because even though you and I are talking about authority and humility, one of the things that I mentioned in my blog in all of these areas is, if you have this, you build trust. If you do this, you build trust. So ultimately, so many things come back to trust. So I really like your idea of a trust reservoir. And it also highlights that people don't necessarily come into the organization or into any system new and trust it right away. You actually build trust. It takes time to build trust, and it's the leader's responsibility to build that trust with the individual. It's not a title. This was brought up in one of my other interviews. It's not just because you have a title. It's because you're showing that you're trustworthy over time. So that, let's talk about the second question here. What is a good balance of authority versus humility when you consider the implementation of change? And are these able to be done simultaneously? And is there a time when one should be used kind of more than the other? So I just asked a whole bunch of questions. Answer it how you like. But what do you think about all of that?
So let's start with the basic understanding. As we give people responsibility in an agency, it must be commensurate to the authority, right? So as you give people responsibility, people grow, and no matter what area of the agency they operate from, you also need to give them the authority that lines up properly with the responsibility that you're giving them. Because you cannot do your work effectively if you've given responsibility but then your hands are tied to your back, and it almost becomes, you set people up to fail, right? So we strike that balance. So we need to get that balance right. Responsibility and authority, they go together. But you do a finer job as a leader if you can mesh, right? If you can really bring humility in that balance that you've already created. So you have a fine situation where you have responsibility and you have the authority that goes with responsibility, but then you deliver this too with humility. And it almost draws people to you, right? Because everybody wants to follow somebody who they can always connect with. And you don't have to leave my situation. You don't have to have a lived experience, but you can connect with me because you understand. And so as we have that good balance of authority, responsibility, and then humility, you pack that together, you create a leader who's really wanting to really connect with your staff. And I really sincerely do not believe as a leader that it serves us any good to remove humility from how we lead. It becomes your bread and butter every day if you function from a place of humility because you stay grounded. You always think before you say. You always consider everything that you say has an effect. And as a leader, sometimes we're not always too conscious of that.
Yep. I think about your trust reservoir and going back to that again. I
Yeah.
think that those things also help build trust.
Very
The
true.
ability
So
to do
much
that absolutely also helps trust. One thing, and you didn't necessarily say this, but I've seen you live it, is this idea of knowing your boundaries as a leader, knowing your limits as a leader, both from a competency standpoint as well as from a job description standpoint. And I know too many leaders where they feel they need to know everything or be the end all for everything. And I know over and over and over again, you will know when you need to say, I'm not going to answer that without speaking with my clinical team because they're the ones that need to give input on this because they're the ones that are going to have to both affect the change as well as speak to what the impact is going to have on the work that they do, right? So, okay. So, last question for you is give examples of how this idea of authority and humility has played out well at Cora. When was it effective? And when do you think we could have done a better job or even could be doing a better job of change management overall?
Oh, that's so I take my mind back, and I'll probably you remember these. You know, I started a car. 10 days later, we shut down, literally shut down. And I remember the conversations we're having in those few days. Is we don't know a lot. Now we know that we have to leave the facility and begin to work virtual. We did not have our infrastructure built for virtual work, and we had to build everything from ground up. And I go back to your leadership during that period. And I say, and I really can wager that it is one of our finest periods. Um, to see an agency walk through a difficult situation with so much humility. And the communication that we gave out all the time, I remember you put out video consistently, periodically, but consistently, and just a state of the agency all the time. But you also make people understand that there's so much we don't know. There's a lot that we do not know, right? But we'll figure it together, right? So yeah, that's one piece that I see that really highlights being a strong leader, leading with humility. It really encapsulates all we're talking about today. On the flip side of area that we had hoped to have done better is the same COVID, right? But now trying to return back to work, trying to create a balance with our new reality of virtual work and back to in person. Before COVID, we did 5 days a week in person. Now there's this hybrid work, hybrid world again that we're trying to navigate. And I do not know that we've been very effective and spot on in our communication. I think we'll figure it out, but we're still trying to figure it out. So that's why the communication is being spotty.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. It's also interesting because COVID was a date and it hit.
Yeah.
You know, post COVID is a journey that everybody's trying to figure out. And it's interesting to see how leadership can or can't be effective when there's the crisis that starts on a day and goes into a different world, and one that's like, okay, what's the long-term journey now that we're going to be on, because we don't really know it. And it's ambiguous, and what employees want, what employers want is totally different. But how to navigate leadership through that, I think, is a really good a point in question, and I completely agree with you. You know, I don't think it's just core. I think it's kind of nationally what we're seeing with like what makes sense? How do you build culture? How do you build community? Can you really do it well in the hybrid world? What does that look like? How many days a week should that be? What's fair? What's equitable? What's not? And so asking all those questions is this big, it's just there's this big gray world that we're certainly in. But so those are all the questions that I had for you around authority and humility. Well, thank you. Thank you for being willing to be on
Thank
this. Thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
as always, you know how much I appreciate working alongside
Thank
of you
you.
every day. So
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Awesome.